Okay, we ready? Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks for the patience. Technical problems seem to follow me around. Um, so first, that was a real treat. Thank you, Eva. That was two of my favorite operas, so that was fantastic. Both Rigoletto and Tosca. If you're not familiar, become familiar. If you don't like opera, I feel sorry for you. Fix it. It's fixable. It really is fixable. You can learn to love opera if you don't already. It's definitely worth the effort. No question, it's worth the effort. So Eva's asked me to. She said, let's do concepts in the hat. I don't know how familiar you are with the concepts in the hat idea. It's a game Ayn Rand and her the group around her used to play, where they would write a bunch of different concepts on pieces of paper, throw it all in a hat, and then pull out two, and then see the relationship between the two. And you'd have to present how the two are connected. So famously, one of them was like sex and economics. What's the relationship between sex and economics? And then it's that was the game. So here the idea was to pull out art and the rise of authoritarianism. So I think what I want to do is really talk about art in the sense of kind of the same kind of historical trajectory arc that we talked about with regard to authoritarianism, and see where we land up. And I think this was made very real. This idea of where we land up was made very real, I think last week or the week before, when a cryptocurrency billionaire bought at auction a banana stuck to a piece of wood, basically taped to a piece of wood, and he bought it for $6 million, the banana, and he ate it a few days ago, and $6 million. And that's the state of art, because this was considered art. And it sparked this whole debate about, is the banana art or isn't the banana art, and is eating the banana art, and isn't the banana eating a regular banana art. So I think that's a good starting point, right, for kind of the discussion we want to have. We want to have a discussion about what is art, and is the banana art. And in that context, I like to start out with these two photos of two very famous sculptures. And one of the things we want to talk about today is, are these two things, do they belong in the same category? If there's a category called art, do these two things belong in that category? And if not, why not? What is it that differentiates Michelangelo's David from Henry Moore's double oval? Right? I think, yeah, double oval. Yeah, my parents would probably prefer the double oval to that. I grew up with double ovals in the house, not Michelangelo's David. So what is art? What purpose does it serve? And what therefore qualifies as art and what doesn't? And for the purpose of today's lecture, I'm just going to use sculpture, and I'm going to use sculpture for a number of reasons. It's a little bit unfair to you, because sculpture is a three-dimensional art, and you're only going to see it in two dimensions, and you're going to see it in photographs, and it's just not right. So you're not going to get the full experience as if we were walking around the sculpture. I could have used painting, which would have been better because it's only two-dimensional. But sculpture, I like sculpture for this purpose, because it's much simpler. There are fewer dimensions by which to evaluate, right? Sculpture typically has no color. You don't have to worry about color. It really has no story. Sculptures almost never have a story. It's usually a human image, one image. It has a background, it has a context, but you don't have to go through a whole, this character's doing this, and this character's doing this, and this. Painting is much more, it requires a lot more analysis, it requires a lot more talking about. I think sculpture is more naked, it's more simple, it's more straightforward, and it's easier for the purpose of what we're trying to do. And of course, that is true relative to painting. It's much more true in comparison to, let's say, literature, where you really have to analyze everything about the literature and compare. And here, it's very visual. You can see it. Again, you don't get the full aesthetic experience. You never do in a slideshow. But for the purposes of what we're doing, I think sculpture serves it well. And plus, I know something about sculpture. I don't know that much about, other forms of art, or I know less about other forms of art than I do about sculpture. Generally, I recommend for everybody to read Romantic Manifesto, Ayn Rand's Romantic Manifesto. It's it's way underappreciated, both in terms of the depth, philosophical depth, and as a result, you learn about art and the value of art. So I highly, highly recommend you read it. And then there's an essay relating to sculpture in particular, which is very good. I don't agree with everything in the essay, but it's really, really good. It's called Metaphysics in Marble by Marianne Suarez. It was published under kind of Ayn Rand's auspices in one of her journals way back. I think you can find it online for free. It's called Metaphysics in Marble, where she analyzes sculpture, which is, I think, really, really interesting and really, really good. So what is art? What function, according to Rand, does art play in human life? And for Rand, which I think is super interesting and, again, really underappreciated by most objectivists, for Rand, art is not optional. It's not like, you live a good life and all this. And if you have time, you can dabble a little bit with experiencing art. Ayn Rand believes that art is an essential part of a flourishing, successful human life. In that sense, art has survival value. To survive as a human being, you need to experience art. You need art in your life to survive qua human being. So what is it? Why is it that we need art to survive as human beings? What is it that art conveys that is so important for us to need it to be successful at living? Well, as human beings, as conceptual beings, most of our life is really, we deal with abstractions, with concepts that are very abstract. And we deal with abstractions, we integrate abstractions, to even higher abstractions. And this is work. This is hard. And what art provides us is a concrete manifestation of these abstractions. So we can talk about justice, and we can theorize about justice, and we can even find ways in particular to concretize the concept of justice, treating people the way they deserve and what that means and how that is. But a story in which there is an immense injustice. I don't know, Tosca? Rigoletto, opera generally, always injustice, right? It really gives you a real sense, a real concrete of this is what injustice really is. This is why I should care so much about justice, because it is so horrific and you feel it. You don't just know it, you feel it, you see it, you understand it in a way that's very hard when you're just dealing with an abstract concept. Oh yeah, one of the virtues is justice. Yeah, let's teach it. Let's talk about it. But then when you see somebody hurt by an injustice, you gain what it means. And the same, of course, the opposite is when you see an act of justice. When you see the positive, now you have a much better understanding and a much better, it connects it to you, and it gives you a greater appreciation of the abstract concept. So the fact that we're constantly dealing with abstractions requires us to make those abstractions concrete. One of the most effective ways of making those abstractions concrete is through art. Again, not an accident. Ayn Rand's a novelist, first and foremost, and she's making her philosophy concrete in the form of an artwork. So that you never, given Atlas Shrugged, it's hard to hold objectivism as complete floating abstraction, although most of us have tried really, really hard to achieve that and have succeeded to some extent. That's a joke, which has not worked. But Atlas Shrugged gives us a concretization of pretty much every one of Ayn Rand's principles. And it makes it much more of a philosophy for living. Now, because it has that impact, It provides you with immense spiritual fuel. You now know what justice means, why it's so important, and why you should be a passionate advocate for justice. You know the consequence of an injustice. You just know it intellectually, you feel it, you understand it in a much deeper and much more profound way. So it provides you with the fuel to actually go out and act in the world. So it serves as a concretization of our abstract ideas. It serves as fuel, spiritual fuels for actually acting out in reality. And think about non-philosophical abstract concepts. Love, right? Love is an abstract concept. And we can kind of understand love and maybe once in a while experience it in real life. But one of the ways in which we learn more about love is by seeing it on stage or in a movie or reading in a book. And we get to experience the love even though we're not in love. We get to experience its meaning, its manifestation, and its importance through the characters. Or heroism. We can all say, oh, yeah, heroes. We all want to be heroes. What does that mean? Again, we can have an abstract formulation of how it is. We can tell ourselves even some stories. But then when we see a hero in a movie, in a stage, in a sculpture, it gives us kind of, oh yeah, that's what I want to be. That's how I want to be. So it gives you the fuel to live. And Rand argues that without this, it is very, very difficult to keep our ideas real, to keep our ideas alive, and to act on them. So we need this constant fuel in order to keep going and to fully understand these philosophical ideas and to make them, truly integrate them into who we are and what we are and how we live our lives. And how does art do this? Art does this by taking these abstractions and concretizing and making them a reality. And for Rand, that's the essence, the essential characteristic of art. Art is a recreation of reality based on an artist's metaphysical value judgments. So what does she mean by metaphysical value judgments? She means the most fundamental value judgment you make about yourself and about the world, and your relationship to the world. So art reflects back to you the idea of, is the world knowable? Is it important? Can you do well in the world? Is man a being that can survive, thrive, be successful in this world? These are kind of the very, very fundamental questions about life, about reality, about what it means to be human, that the artists reflect back. You also get much more detailed philosophical, but the essence of art is these fundamental views about the world, about the nature of man and the nature of reality. So a selective recreation of reality based on artist's metaphysical judgment. And we'll see what selective recreation, what that means. I mean, and whether bananas qualify. And then, of course, the metaphysical value judgments, we will see throughout history how those are manifest in the various art forms, in the various works of art through history. And we'll end up with this. But what does that represent in terms of both metaphysical value judgments? What does this represent in terms of the kind of spiritual fuel it can grant you? And what is that? So, and that's the question. Are they in the same category? Are both of them art? Is it useful to have them both of art? I mean, maybe you look at this and say, yeah, it's kind of pretty. Maybe not. But is it the same as that? Is there sameness here, right? Are we just, if you know something about Einmann's theory of concepts, are we just omitting measurements here? Is it the same category, but we're omitting a measurement? And I think the answer is no, but we'll see a little bit more as we go through. All right, so as I said, we're going to go through the history to just see how values are reflected in artwork, and we'll see how values in this case are reflected within sculpture. And these are, Egyptian sculptures from a long time ago, 5,000 years ago. I mean, this is old, right? And it gives us a little bit of sense of Egypt was a civilization. And if you look at this, I mean, it's pretty impressive, right? First, you have to say it's pretty impressive. They could sculpt a human being. They had the technical ability to sculpt. If you've seen cave drawings, and if you've seen sculptures even older than this is quite an achievement as compared to pre-civilization. So there's a real civilization here. But what you find is if you look at these sculptures, they're almost all, in very important ways, the same. There's a certain conformity across thousands of years of Egyptian culture, hundreds of years of Egyptian culture. There's the same. Left foot always forward, right? So same foot is always forward. Body's never twisting. They're not three-dimensional in a real sense. There's always a flat back to them. It's not to be walked around. The anatomy is very abstracted away, very, very kind of minimal. You don't see much. Expressions. I mean, these are interesting individuals here. You'd like to meet one of them? No, I mean, they're fairly flat expressions, very little individuation. Most of them look about the same, very standard. All of them are kings or really, really important people. Those are the people that have manifested themselves. And what is the main purpose? If you know a little bit about Egyptian culture, what were they celebrating here primarily? Yeah, death. The primary focus of Egyptian culture is what comes afterwards. The actual dying. They build these amazing monuments to life, like pyramids, right? There's these magnificent buildings. To this day, we don't know exactly how they did it. They're so sophisticated. They're so amazing, right? But what was the purpose of them? To bury somebody inside of them, right? The whole culture was oriented towards death, static, lack of importance of the individual himself. There's no heroism here. There's no knowledge of the world. There's no action in the world. There's no going out there into the world to discover it. There is a passivity and a staticness. Staticness, is that a word? There's a static nature to these sculptures. And that's kind of the metaphysical value judgment you get here. You get here a culture that's not going anywhere, people that are not going anywhere, not projecting any future, anything interesting. It's flat, it's focused on passivity. As compared to the first great civilization focused on man, not on death, on life, not on death, Greece. And here you get movement, you get action, you get characters that are beautiful and that are different. They don't all have the same faces. They don't even have the same bodies. And they're twisting now, and they're truly three-dimensional, right? You can walk around the sculpture and see it from different angles and get a different appreciation for what the artist is trying to project in different angles here. There's a sense of motion. These are people acting in reality, pursuing values, actually engaged in value creation. So a completely different metaphysical value judgments here about the nature of man, the nature of reality. Reality is knowable. I can act within reality. I can achieve things within reality. And there's a sense of confidence, right? This guy with a spear. I mean, he wants to achieve stuff, and look at the slave in the background who's about. He's got an expression. He's striving to something, maybe freedom. Right? But he's eager to do something. He's not just going to sit there and do nothing. Lancon is a little later in Greece, but Winged Victory, of course, I don't know if you've seen it in real life at the Louvre. It is stunning. The motion, just the sense that she is just going to take off from there and achieve great things and do great things in the world. The discus thrower, which is, from the peak of Greek civilization. I look at the movement, the action, the three-dimensionality. I mean, this is carved out of one piece of marble. That's the other thing to think about. Just the technical skill involved in carving such a thing is stunning. Very few people could actually literally do it, never mind project this kind of sense of life that is reflected in there. Right? So there is a dynamism and excitement and a projection of an athlete at his prime in 3 dimensionals with immense skill. And then the middle one is a tragic story, right? They're not going to win this fight. The snake has them, right? There's the snake representing evil. Snake has them. But they're going to go down fighting. He's going to fight for his kids. And again, this idea of fighting, of engaging with reality, of fighting for your values, even when there's little hope, right? Typical of Greek tragedy more broadly. But the power, the 3-dimensionality, again, the skill, this is all carved from one piece of marble. It's not stuck together, which is just, I mean, think about, you can't make mistakes. That's one thing about marble, is if you make a mistake, you can't fix it. It's almost impossible to fix it. But there's a completely different cultural sense than what you saw in Egypt. And then we descend. Right? Dark ages are dark. They're dark not just in the quality of life and life expectancy, but in the arts and in the projection of the art. Life is a nightmare. Life is short, brutish, and whatever Hobbes said. And it's unbelievably unpleasant. The skill level is way lower because there's not a lot of detail that you need to convey. Horror is easy to convey. It's simple. It's straightforward. And what you get on cathedrals all over Europe are these images of nightmares, because that's life. And that's, in some ways, if fear is a mechanism to control politically, then you want a culture of fear, because then it's easy to control people who are afraid. And, Christianity wants people to cower. Because, I mean, these are grand cathedrals. So you've got these, you enter them, you're small, God is infinite, and there are monsters looking over your shoulder, making sure you behave. Otherwise, they come in your nightmares and do horrible things to you. I think that's the mythology anyway. You've got Jesus on a cross. Here, you can barely, I mean, it's not a great photo, but there's almost no anatomy to the Jesus on the left. There's almost nothing. It's just almost stick figure, twisted and suffering. Here, you're already starting to see a little bit of anatomy and expression. This is already the Renaissance, 1470. A little bit of individuality. So, there's, I like crucifixions. I mean, the reason I like crucifixions in sculpture and in painting is because it's the same theme over and over and over and over again. And there are thousands of them that were made in the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, Renaissance, and post-Renaissance, all the way to Dali's crucifixion, if you're familiar with Dali's crucifixion. And the nice thing is you could do a whole history of art just with crucifixions, right? Just to see how the attitude towards this one figure changes. We'll see a little bit of that later on, but just how we project. This is not, none of this is, Jesus is particularly heroic. He looks really miserable and suffering. And you'll compare this in a minute to kind of the Michelangelo's perception, for example, of Jesus, which is very, very different. More kind of Middle Ages, this is Middle Ages. Not particularly sophisticated, not particularly well done, no real anatomy, and I don't think they care. It's not, and they don't know anatomy. They've lost that knowledge. They could carve up human beings and check to see what's under the skin, but they're not allowed to. Right? In the Renaissance, when they start doing dissections, they could be penalized pretty harshly by the church for doing so. They have to do it at night and in secret. Michelangelo and Leonardo separately, because they don't like each other, but separately do it. But it's very difficult. So they don't even know anatomy. They don't know what's under the skin. Think about also, this is a period, life expectancy is in the 20s, 29 maybe. Life is brutal. So it's not surprising you don't see strong, heroic characters, coming out of this. And they don't know anatomy. They don't know anything but the church. They don't know anything but what they've learned from the church. And you can see these figures are pretty primitive, pretty distorted, and not particularly inspiring. But there's, it's art in a sense that there are real values represented here, right? That's the Garden of Eden, story of the Garden of Eden. And you can say something about humanity in this figure. It's not very positive, it's not very good, but that's the point. They're not trying to project a positive vision of man. They're trying to project a negative vision of man, because that's fundamentally the vision of man, of the church during this period. This is kind of interesting. This is 3 Pietas that I think reflect very different attitudes towards life. The left is a Middle Ages, just before the Renaissance Pietà. And it's barely human. Look at Jesus there. And he's barely human. Again, a stick figure more than anything else, a representative. It's, you can kind of sympathize with it. You see the mother, she's in mourning. It's ugly. It's really ugly. And it's not interesting. And you just don't get any sense of, there's no skill level. Look at the arms and the fingers. They're like a 12-year-old would do it, but not a proficient artist. As compared to Michelangelo's Pietà in the middle, his first Pietà. I don't know if you've seen the sculpture. If you haven't seen the sculpture, it's worth a trip to Rome just to see it. Although the sad thing about it is it's behind glass because somebody tried to shoot it. So it's behind bulletproof glass, so you can't get very close to it. But it is a stunning work of art. And part of it is, it's really human. I mean, Jesus could get up and walk off the stage there. And it's not just any Jesus. He's not a stick figure. This is a powerful young man who has fallen. This is somebody who is, you can see all the muscles in the arms and in the abdomen. This is not that pathetic human being. This is a hero. Whatever you think of Jesus, now we're projecting Jesus as a heroic figure. And man is capable of heroism. And Mary is this amazingly dignified mother who's just lost a son. And there's a sense in which Michelangelo makes her about the same age as Jesus, even though she's his mother, because it's very universal. Here's a young woman who's lost an immense value. These could be lovers. It doesn't have to be a mother and child, given the age of it. But she's strong, she's powerful, she's holding this incredibly masculine man on her lap. That's not a burden. What you get is the grief. What you get is the horror of what she's experiencing. And it's just a beautiful, magnificent piece. But man is incredibly capable, strong, and beautiful. And then by the end of Michelangelo's career, I don't know how much you know about Michelangelo, but he was very, very religious. And his career has an arc to it where he's he's secular and heroic at the beginning. Think Pietà and think the David. And then as his life goes on, religion becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger part of him. He feels more and more and more guilt, and his images start to change. And think about the Dying Slave. Dying Slave is a masterpiece, one of the great sculptures of all time. But it's not David in terms of the values that it's projecting. Now it's about overcoming suffering and dealing with suffering and resignation around suffering. He's a dying slave. He's on the verge of giving up the fight. If you want to see that, it's also at the Louvre. There are 2 slaves at the Louvre that are just 2 of the greatest sculptures ever. They're beautiful. They're incredibly emotional. But he's gone. He's not in the heroic stage anymore. And towards the end of his life, this is how he sees the Pietà. Now, this is not completely fair because it's not finished work. But you can see already, gone is the kind of Jesus who is strong and heroic and this magnificent human being. Now, it's a broken Jesus and a broken Mary, and they're duped and they're failing, and these are his values. He's projecting his value judgments. He's projecting his view of the world, which has changed over his life. I mean, you all know this sculpture. Again, if you haven't seen it in real life, haven't lived, really, to some extent, it's stunning. You walk into Academia in Florence, and it's at the end of the corridor, and it's breathtaking. And even though there are 1 million people standing around, it doesn't matter. You can abstract them away. And it's, so the first time I saw him live, I think probably the second time I saw him live, the first time I don't remember, I was a young kid. But it was just, I don't know, I spent an hour in front of this, just going around and seeing it from every angle. It is so amazing and stunning. And here's a hero. If you want a hero, here's a hero, right? He's not doing anything. He's just standing. And you don't even have to know it's David, right? That's the thing about great art. For great art, for you to appreciate great art, you don't need to know the story. The story adds context, it adds relevance, but you don't need to know the story. What do you see here? You see a confident young man with a sling, and he's got a rock in his hand. He's getting ready for an act. He's getting ready for action. Super focused. You can see it on his face and on his brow, wrinkled brow. He's very intense. He's very focused. He's got some mission he's engaged with. He's going to achieve something. And he's supremely confident. And in this body, he is supremely able. There's no question about his ability to do what it is that he is going to do. So you've got here a man of action, but not in the act. In the contemplation of the act, in the preparation of the act, in the mental state that you need before you act, which is very unusual. Almost all Davids, many, again, like the Pietà, there are lots of Davids, almost all Davids are after the act. Like if you think about Donatello's David, and those of you who've watched my show, there's a David just behind my shoulder, on the screen. Those are David's right after he's won. He's got his leg on Goliath's head. He's got a sword, and he's won, right? And then we'll see in a minute Bernini's David in the act of sending the rock in the direction of Goliath. But here there's no action, and yet this is a man of action. That's the beauty of being able to convey something like this. You get all the indications of action and success and heroism are right here, even though it's completely passive, right? He's got 1 foot forward, but he's not doing more than that. For me, greatest sculpture ever, but it's my evaluation. So that's the Renaissance. Post-Renaissance, sculpture becomes a lot more dynamic, a lot more action. But again, you see man as the actor engaged in activities, whether the story is a mythology story, which is not a pleasant story, for her at least, or Bernini's David, and again, you can't really appreciate this stuff in photos. This is really cool. I don't know if you can see it, but the fingers are making indentations in the skin, and you get the indentations in the marble. And again, he carved this one piece. It's just unbelievable. And you go there and you see it, and it looks like this, skin is pressed. It's just magnificent. So this is in the Villa Borghese in Rome. After you see the Pietà and the Vatican Museum, you got to go here. This is the collection of sculpture here is just stunning. The Berninis are amazing. Here's David in the process of slinging the sling, right? Slinging the rock. It's unbelievable. You go around this and the action, how mobile it is, how he's caught him in this middle. But again, the metaphysical value judgments you're getting here is man is capable of action. Man belongs in this world. Man is capable of controlling this world. I mean, the story here gives a different metaphysical value judgment, but in the sculpture itself, is this energy, is this competence, is this world is knowable, conquerable, if you will. I can conquer this world. Here's some portraits, again, from this is from 18th century. This, I think, is the greatest sculptor portraiture ever. This is Jean-Antoine Houdon. That's a Benjamin Franklin. I mean, you can see his personality right there, right? This is a guy who's engaged. He's a little funny, but he's engaged in reality. He's very much alive, and you can see that the sculpture's alive. That is George Washington. Anybody know who that is? That's Voltaire, right? That is Voltaire. And you can see, again, he's got that sly smile on his face. I mean, he's just captured what you would imagine Voltaire to be like. Now, he took this from life. He modeled for him. But it's the artist who chose that particular expression and how alive Voltaire. I mean, he literally looks like he's going to tell you a joke or tell you a story right then and there. You get the personalities. And these are living being individuals with unique personalities, clearly identifiable, unique personalities, living beings in this world, not in some floating abstraction somewhere else, but right here on Earth. This is at the Louvre, Spartacus. And again, you don't need to know the name of the sculpture, right? I assume everybody knows who Spartacus is. You don't need to know who Spartacus was. What do you see here? A man who's just broken his chains, who's got this clear expression looking forward, looking towards the future, looking towards where he's going. Incredible confidence and competence, comfortable in this world, clearly a valuer and knows what he wants, and eager to get there. This is in the sculpture garden at the Louvre. This is the D'Orsay. This is Rodin. We'll see Rodin in a minute. This is Rodin at his best. Again, young man, beautiful, confident in this world. Right? And all of everything that entails, everything that implies. I love this sculpture. She's beautiful. So this is La Musique. It's, again, one piece of marble. It's not far from here. It's in Copenhagen. Copenhagen, by the way, for those of you who don't know, has one of the best sculpture collections in the world, in my view, at the Glyptotek in the center of Copenhagen. And that is all a collection of the beer Mongol. What was his name? What's the beer that they drink in Copenhagen? What's that? Carlsberg. So Carlsberg collected these sculptures and donated to the gallery, and you can see. But the secret is that he kept some of them for himself, and there's still some sculptures and paintings from his collection at the brewery. So if you go to the Carlsberg headquarters of the brewery and you talk yourself into getting inside, you will find some amazing sculpture and amazing painting over there, the stuff that he didn't give to the gallery. But this is in the gallery. Again, a sense of joy, a sense of, she's a violin player, she's an accomplished violin player. You get this, again, sense of comfort within this world. This world is hers. She is conquering this world. This is, again, from the same period, 19th century. This is in London. This is at the Leighton House in London. This is Frederick Leighton. It's similar to L'Ancona, where he's fighting the snake, but here, who's winning? I mean, the guy's got it, I think. I think he's going to win. But look at how three-dimensional it is. Look at, again, how he's twisted, legs, arms, how the fight is on. And you get a sense of again, victory and success. These are more 19th century sculptures. The thing in the 19th century brings into the picture is emotion, powerful emotion, both expressed, both in facial expressions and in body movements. You can see the couple embracing. This is Jeanne d'Arc both of these, again, are from the Glyptothek, but Joan d'Arc, you can find in lots of museums. There are multiple copies of the sculpture in a lot of different museums. But she has such a powerful expression. She's committed. She's a valuer. She knows what she wants. You know, what she wants has been revealed to her, but that's irrelevant to the fact that here's a valuer who's going to go out there and do something in the world. And the sculpture really expresses that. And again, you got to see it close up to really gain an appreciation of it. So that's the 19th century, a period of huge amount of optimism, positive, life expectancy is increasing, wealth is increasing, people are doing significantly better. Things are going, for humanity, you have to say things are going amazingly well. And yet, as we talked about in the first talk, there's this underlying philosophy out there that is anti-enlightenment. Like the world is functioning based on enlightenment ideas and growth and prosperity and industry and innovation and all this. But philosophy is undercutting it constantly. And in a sense, the first place you start seeing this undercutting is in art. The first place you start seeing the values, you know, so you go from this heroic, competent, beautiful image of man to Rodin's Gates of Hell. You know, now you've got distorted figures in pain. It reminds you a little bit of the gargoyles of the Middle Ages. You're getting that. And this is philosophy saying you don't have reason. You're not competent. You can't deal with the world. Who knows what reality really is? We don't know what reality really is. We don't have access to it. And what does that generate? Fear, distrust, falling apart, gates of hell. Or you go to, you know, other works by Rodin, the Burghers of Calais. And look, I showed you a sculpture before Rodin. Rodin knew sculpture. He knew anatomy. He knew how to do, he could do anything he wanted. But he chose to do this. Like this walking man, which is a torso with no head and no arms. You know why we have a lot of torsos from Greece and Rome? You know, there are a lot of beautiful torsos from Greece and Rome. Do you know why they're torsos? Because the heads broke off, and the arms broke off, and the legs broke off. No Greek or Roman sculpture would think of actually sculpting a torso. Like they'd have arms, and they'd have a head, so they broke, right? It takes a modern artist, like, and a very competent one at that, to actually make a sculpture with no head, no reason, no sight, no senses, no arms to deal with reality, just an animal with two legs. So, I mean, this is a particularly corrupt piece of work. It's art. There are real metaphysical value judgments here, but they're not good. This is a very, very dark work. And, you know, much of Rodin's work in this period is such. He still does beautiful portraits. You can find them in the Rodin Museum. There's some beautiful, beautiful portraits of particularly young women that he does. But a lot of his work becomes this. And again, there's an arc. He becomes worse with age as he becomes more cynical and more distraught about the world and more influenced by the philosophy around him. I mean, France is an intellectual place, and he's very much absorbing the ideas that are around him. Because then you get to the 20th century. And I just did this as a contrast because they kind of have the same theme, right? At least that's what they claim. The one on the left is Giacometti, gazing head. It's a square with some indents, and it's a gazing head. That's a gazing head. She's gorgeous, intense, but very feminine, very soft, and yet incredibly intense. So, and that's, I don't know what that is. Is something being projected there? Only because there's a title. If there was no title, you would look at that and say, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it says. Yeah. You get that if you what? If you squish?
Clay sculptors, if you accidentally squish
Oh.
your work, you get
Yeah, I think he squished it on purpose though. This is, by the way, Carrara marble, again, one piece, carved. I found her at an antique store in Rome, walking by, and there she was in the window. And I told my wife, let's go in and ask. We can't afford it, but let's go in and ask. And it turned out she wasn't that expensive. And they shipped it to us to the US, and she's in our living room. So I don't think I'd walk into somewhere to ask about that one. And if I got it by mistake, I'd probably put it in the trash. Here's another example. Snowdrop. Again, Copenhagen, Glyptotek, one of my favorites at the Glyptotek. She's just gorgeous. You know, she's sensual, she's of this world. And then, you know, these are supposed to be women, standing figures of women. And they are, in a sense, so they're not completely gone, but they're gone. And this is a view of humanity, of a female, of a woman, and femininity, and what a woman can be. And these are views of, and it's a different universe. And again, philosophy has consequences. This is the 20th century. So this goes back to the subjectivism we talked about earlier, the complete nonsense, the postmodernism. There's no truth, there's no reality, there is no there. So anything goes. Any blob goes. Any nonsense counts. Words don't mean anything, right? We talked about art meaning something, having concepts. Our concepts are completely arbitrary. We make them up. So if I want to call that art, why is it not art? That is the perspective. There's a 20th century crucifixion. It's pretty amazing because it looks very much like Dark Ages crucifixion. Right? It's completely what's abstracted away? Humanity. What's abstracted away? The individual. What's abstracted away? Any values. It's just a stick figure. And by the way, one of the things that's abstracted away, and this is true in a post-Rodin world, is talent, skill, workmanship, all abstracted away. None of those exist anymore because you don't need them, right? You're not carving a complex three-dimensional work in marble. You're just sticking some stuff together. You know, there is a truth to this idea that a 5-year-old can do it. It's probably not art. And I don't know if a 5-year-old could do exactly this, but something similar, not that far from it. And then, of course, you get to completely what they call abstract art, which is exact opposite, concrete art, in a sense of it's just blobs, it's just rocks, they're very smooth. I give them that. They've smoothed them out. And there's some aesthetic appeal, maybe, to some of these things. They could be pretty, but they're not conveying anything. They're just empty. They're just nothing. And this is, again, the sense in which subjectivism has won the day among a big chunk of our society. This is, again, the same thing we're seeing in politics, the same thing we see everywhere. We call this leftist art, right? This is the left, the subjectivity, the woke, the identitarian politics, all of that, because it's all about emotion. There's no ideas, there's no values, there's no thinking, there's just emoting. And there's no skill. I think that's it. Oh no, I've got this one. I've got two more. Fear. We talked about fear. Look at that spider. That's spooky. A shark. It's just scary. There's no point other than that. Again, these are gargoyles. These are modern gargoyles. And then finally, you want anarchy. You want not anarchy. You want nihilism in art. This is nihilism in art, right? You put a urinal in a museum, in a museum, and you call it art. What are you doing? What's the purpose of doing that? It's to annihilate art. It's to take that concept, this idea of art representing something, and say it doesn't represent anything. It represents whatever I feel like. It's empty. It has no content. It has no value. It's gone. It's finished. And, Dali, being Dali, likes to play around with these things. So a lobster on a telephone, which is funny and entertaining, but not art. And again, Dali knows art. He can do art. He can do amazing art, right? But he's all over the place, and it's all about emotion, and it's all about, a certain sense of nihilism. Let's just break everything apart. Let's just destroy everything. So the same arc we see in philosophy, the same arc we see in politics, that goes from authoritarianism, Middle Ages, resurrects the Greeks, resurrects the ideas of the Greeks, individualism, and ultimately reason you see in the art form, and then kind of the descent into postmodernist hell, guided by, in the arts, and in our politics, and in our lives, and in our culture. You can't escape the power of ideas. Ideas are going to have an impact. They're going to have an impact in one way or another, but they're going to have an impact. And the one realm in which you could argue the Enlightenment does not survive into our world in any significant way are the plastic arts. I mean, you could argue that maybe some in movies, or can't say in literature. So in the arts, it almost doesn't exist, right? That Enlightenment spirit, it survives in tech, in science, in industry, the material things of the world. But anything spiritual, anything that gets away from that, anything that requires an abstraction, anything that requires ideas, the Enlightenment ideas are out. And what you get is bananas stuck to planks of wood, being eaten by billionaires, and people thinking that is art. Thank you. All right, questions? Yeah.
Today we have more wealth than any point in human history. But like you just pointed out, we don't have any art really. But then why, and then in ancient Greece, you had amazing art, but we didn't have the technology or the wealth that we have today. But why do you think that's happened? That's really 2,500 years ago. Why did it only come in the 1700s in England?
Why didn't we have the Industrial Revolution 2,000 years ago? I think, I don't know. I think two things happened, basically. One is Aristotle came too late. And two is Christianity came in too early, right? And Christianity came to dominate. And I think that those two facts, and they're related because it could be that Christianity's success is a consequence of Aristotle coming in too late, kind of ended the reign and success of Greek philosophy and didn't let it manifest into the real world. Now, look, Greek philosophy is amazing, but at the end of the day, what leads to Enlightenment, what leads to the Industrial Revolution is Aristotle and an understanding of Aristotle. And Aristotle's not very successful in his, he's successful in his school, but his ideas do not have a huge, profound impact on the culture after he dies. His students don't pick up quite the same fervor as Plato's students. And Plato lands up being the major influence in Christianity until Aquinas. It's all Plato. They're all Neoplatonists. So it takes, 1,300 years before Aristotle is reintroduced into the Western world. Some of his works are still out there, and there's some Christian philosophers that are dealing with Aristotle before Aquinas, but Aquinas is a great integrator that brings Aristotle in. So, you could write, it would be fascinating to write kind of an alternative history novel where maybe Greece is more influenced by Aristotle early on. Maybe Rome is not the major power, because the other thing Rome brings is this real pragmatism and less intellectuality. Rome is less interested in ideas. Ideas are still there, but they're at the fringes of Rome. Rome itself is not a center of intellectual activity. Alexandria is. Greece continues to be. But Rome is more interested in power. Rome is more interested in military science. It's interested in politics. You get people like Cicero and others writing about politics, but you don't get the kind of philosophical inquiry in Rome and under Roman rule as you did under the Greeks. And I think there's a sense in which Rome maybe kills that off and then embraces Christianity, and in that sense, it's all over. So it would be interesting to write an alternative history. I saw somebody write an alternative history where Rome never declines and it embraces the technology and everything. But what they don't get there is that you can't get the technology without freedom, and the Rome, post-Republic is not free, so it couldn't have advanced. So, and maybe that's it. Maybe you needed the real progress in political philosophy, which you get in the Enlightenment, you get even in the beginning of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, which you don't get yet in Greece and Rome. That's you need to kind of establish the ethics and the epistemology before you can get to politics. My best stab at an answer. Other questions on anything? It's been a long day. People are tired, yeah.
Immanuel Kant, I haven't read him, so I don't know, but I heard this thing about he describes the childishness of art, doesn't he?
Yes.
Do you know how he connects this with this anti-perception philosophy? Do you know how he extracts this? Because he's kind of famous for being the father of this modern art, the philosophy.
I mean, I think he's the father of it because, and I don't know how he makes a connection, but I think he's the father of it because it basically makes reason impotent. So all you're left with is emotion. And I think this kind of is just a reflection of that. So I think that in the crude sense is how it's connected. All of these movements that are all focused on emotion come from him. But then almost all modern movements, both the right and left, politically come from him in one way or the other because he is such a towering figure over modern philosophy. But I think it's this, as soon as you disengage the faculty of reason from reality, you open up the world to subjectivism. And that's what you get. Yeah, there was another hand here.
Yeah, just thinking about this, going back to the point of Brand saying that art is not just a leisure activity, it's like a vital need.
Yeah.
Because when we look at these later images of not really art, I don't really give you any evidence. It's just interesting to contrast that to the fact that we still have superhero movies in the cinema. And people, at least here in Norway, people are still very fond of crime detective novels. Where
You guys have pretty dark crime detective novels. Something rotten in the state of Scandinavia.
But this still kind of has like romantic element where people act and you have like strong character description. Do you see like there's like one art for the philosopher kings and one for the people who actually use art?
Look, I think people need art. And there's a need, so there's an industry that comes around to fulfill that need. It might not be very good art, but it's fulfilling. So we need images of heroism. It just makes life more enjoyable and more meaningful. So they produce what they understand to be heroisms. They create superheroes. God forbid it be actually a human being heroic. You can't have that. So you create superheroes. You have to give them a superpower. And of course, they all act, I hate superhero movies, they drive me nuts. They all act altruistically. Batman can't kill, and this guy can't do this, and that guy can't do, the bad guys can do it, but they're not allowed to. And then they ultimately sacrifice, right? With the exception of, what's his name's Batman trilogy, where at the end he's in Paris with his girlfriend. I like the final scene, although I think it's completely unrealistic and inconsistent with the movie. But they're basically altruists saving the world constantly. The Batman trilogy is the best in that sense because he knows it, right? I mean, by the end of the third movie, he's like, why do I keep saving these people that don't deserve it? And there's a sense in which the makers read Atlas Shrugged, so there might be an influence in a sense in which at the end of the movie he shrugs and he's off to Paris and to hell with what do you call it? The big city, Gotham, yeah, Gotham. So he's gone. I think those are the best of the so-called superhero movies. The rest are just bromides. It's the same story over and over and over again. It's the same hero over and over again doing the same thing over and over again. So they drive me nuts. They're just boring. I find them really, really boring. And they try to get you interested with action, and the action sequences are crazy and bizarre. And I find myself, if I'm watching like on an iPad or something, I find myself fast forwarding through the action scenes because who cares how exactly he beats him up as long as he beats him up. What was the other one? Oh, the detective novels. I mean, a lot of those are interesting because a lot of times you find in these kind of detective novels that it's not so much that the policeman is that talented and he kind of figures this out and he uses logic like Sherlock Holmes, using logic, but a lot of it is kind of this clue accidentally leads to this clue and he kind of fumbles his way to solving the mystery rather than actually solving the mystery. And I find that incredibly frustrating. And again, I think it portrays this image of less than competence. I mean, the only one, I mean, I love these, you remember the girl with the dragon tattoo? I mean, I love those, and I loved her because the girl was the hero, right? It wasn't the reporter who's like nominally solves it all, but he's just bumbling idiot who just bumps around and happens to be, she guides him to solve the thing. She is an incredible romantic character because she takes her own fate into her own hands and determines kind of how the story plays out. And I really enjoyed those novels, as dark as they were, because I mean, one of the things they have to do is they have to make evil so frigging evil in all the gory details of it in order to capture, I guess, a modern audience. I don't know. But there's a darkness to a lot of those detective stories. Like, yes, there's some competent people, but the world is dark. There are monsters everywhere. There are gargoyles everywhere. And you have to really be careful.
Could you say something about popularity of TV series like Breaking Bad or Sopranos?
Breaking Bad and what was the other one? The Sopranos. Yeah, I mean, first, look, Breaking Bad and Sopranos are really, really good shows. They are well written. They tell kind of interesting stories about really bad people. But they're interesting shows. And, the cinematography, interesting. They're really well made. And this is the thing about art, right? You can gain massive value from art that reflects an evil philosophy. Leonard Peikoff has a lecture called The Survival Value of Great Art with Evil, I think it was called Great Art with Evil Philosophy. Think Dostoevsky. I mean, Dostoevsky's awful in terms of his philosophy. I wouldn't want to live in Dostoevsky's head or in the world as he sees it. It's terrible. And philosophically, I'm opposed to pretty much everything he argues for. And yet, you get this great insight into characters, and the writing is beautiful, and there's so much value to be gained from it because, again, the value is often metaphysical. The values are metaphysical. And in that sense, Dostoevsky characters have free will, and you get this reflection of an acting person in the world, doing horrible things, but in the world. And there's a certain, I think, value to Breaking Bad's too long and it's too repetitive, but it's not Dostoevsky. But there's a certain value to these shows because they're so well made that you can get out of them. But there's no question, it also tells you something that the world loves bad guys and hates good guys. Or if the good guys, if it likes good guys, they have to be super heroes. They can't be just heroes. So, and there's no, if you take a series like Breaking Bad, They're literally no good guys. There's one good guy, the brother-in-law, and he dies, he's killed in a horrible way. So there's nothing good comes out of anybody, right? It's all just depressing upon depressing upon depressing. But if you want a theme, it does show how breaching one's principles, doing bad stuff, slippery slopes exist. That I would say is the theme of Breaking Bad, right? Because he just does one thing in the first episode that leads to 5 seasons of horror and murder and disaster, right? And Sopranos is I'm not sure what the theme of Sopranos is, but Sopranos is again well done, particularly for its time. It's trying to portray gangsters as human beings. It's trying to give them humanity. Awful, but there are almost no shows that are positive of that quality, in terms of the amount invested and how well it's done.
In lieu of Einstein's definition of art, could you please recapitulate what is the minimum requirement for a sculpture to become a piece of art?
Yeah.
You say you have good sculpture, bad sculptures, and then you have non-sculpture or sculptures that are not art.
Yes. So I would say to be art, you have to have 2 things. You have to, one, it has to be a recreation of reality in some form. So it has to be identifiable. It can't just be a circle. It can't just be a blob of something. It has to be something in reality. And then it has to convey something. It has to convey some kind of idea. It has to convey a metaphysical value judgment of the artist. So there has to be something there that you can receive, not just what he intended, right? I'm sure Jackson Pollock had a particular view when he splashed the paint on the canvas. But there's no there. If you look at the canvas, it splotches of paint. There's no value there. There's nothing I can tease out of it. It's not a recreation of reality, and there's no values there other than he splashed paint on the canvas. So he can write an essay on what he intended to do, but he didn't succeed because nobody can get it without reading the essay. That's another way is if you can't understand the art, just can't understand it without reading an essay, it's not art. An essay might enhance your understanding, but you have to be able to gain some understanding. And then in terms of good art or bad art, I shouldn't really, you need to be an expert to be able to say what good art and bad art are. And you have to be an expert in a particular art form. And that means it has to do a good job recreating the reality you wanted to recreate and conveying the values that you wanted to recreate. And what constitutes a good job doing that is the whole field of aesthetics that you would have to study to figure out what's good sculpture, what's bad sculpture. You have to be an expert, and what I should say really in a presentation like this is sculpture I like, this is sculpture I don't like. That I know. What's good and what's not, I think I have a good sense, but I don't know that I could prove because I don't know enough about the field.
So on art and especially skyscrapers for me, so you mentioned that the criteria is that it recreates something.
Yeah.
And it conveys the value judgment. But still, I mean, for me, skyscrapers play a big role in me deciding if I want to travel to the city or not. I'm not going there, unless it's something special like Athens conference.
You're not gonna go to Florence ever. Yeah.
Oh, the museums and stuff, but the skyscrapers give me spiritual view.
Yeah.
But they don't really meet the 2 criteria.
They're not art. Skyscrapers are not art.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm trying to find word for it.
I mean, skyscrapers convey values. That is, they convey grandeur, they convey ambition, they convey reaching for the stars. But they're not a work of art. A work of art is something that stands by itself. It doesn't have another purpose. Skyscrapers have an aesthetic element, a strong, important, big aesthetic element. They can be pretty, they can be ugly, for example. And they definitely can move you, but a lot of things can move you, right? A beautiful woman walking down the street can move you, right? And it doesn't make her a piece of art. So you can be moved by a lot of things that are aesthetic, that convey something. That doesn't make them art. What is the category of all things that move you? I'm not sure there is such a thing. Aesthetics is broader than art. So you can, for example, scenery. You can go and see beautiful mountains and have a real experience and have an emotional experience and that's an aesthetic experience, right? There's an aesthetic quality to a beautiful landscape, not a painting, an actual landscape. There's an aesthetic quality to, you guys are very good, you guys, Scandinavians, very good at designing furniture. I used to have a watch designed by this Danish guy, Jensen, who designs all kinds of, it's beautiful designs. And you can say, wow, that's really, really beautiful. That's pretty. It's not art, but it has this immense aesthetic experience. So again, differentiating between art and other aesthetic phenomena is somebody has to do that work. I'm not, I haven't done the work, but that requires real work to figure out what's the difference and what role they play. Surrounding yourself with, a beautiful space is an immense value, not quite the value of a great sculpture, but it's still a value. So, and it provides you with fuel, I think, just like the skyscrapers do.
I got stuck with the term, like when people say, "Oh, this is art," when they say that something is aesthetically pleasing. So I guess
You've got to differentiate. You can see a beautiful car, a beautiful automobile, and it could inspire. Wow, that's just the lines are just gorgeous and it's beautiful, but it's not art. It's an automobile. So and you can get fuel out of it. But art is for its own sake. And skyscrapers are the closest because they have, Rand talks about it's a kind of a mixed case. It definitely has strong aesthetic, artistic elements, but I don't think you can categorize it just as art.
Do you think people have lost their ability to appreciate art? Will become monotonous?
Yes, there's no question. And I think modern art has done that to us, so-called modern art, right? When a banana stuck to a thing is art, then I don't want to go to an art museum. And most people, just normal people, I think, they're kind of cynical and skeptical about art because it's lost all meaning. Because if the rounded things and Michelangelo's David are the same thing, I lose my appreciation for Michelangelo's David. And and then we're never taught how to appreciate great art, what to look for, how to experience it. It requires skill. We just assume that just expose me and it'll be there. And no, it requires a certain approach to what you're looking at and a certain knowledge. How, and again, if you trivialize great art, which we have by comparing it to the garbage that they call art today, it's very hard for people to recover from that. In some art museums, the janitors confuse the garbage for the art for the garbage, and they take it out in the trash. So and intellectuals will defend that as art, and so art's meaningless. What's the point? And a lot of people come to that conclusion, and what they're left with is superhero movies. That's the deepest they will go. Because it's entertainment. There's a reason why movies are not just art. There's an entertainment element to it. And people like to be entertained. Art challenges you. Art actually, you need to invest something in the aesthetic experience with art. It doesn't just hit you. You have to actually invest in it. You have to think about what's going on here, except for music, where you can't. I don't think. Music really just hits you.
So we're in Oslo, and they have a big museum dedicated to Yaron Brook. Or
Monk, yeah. A lot of Munk's stuff is is pretty powerful. It's upsetting. It's not the kind of emotion I would like to go through, right? But his scream is, Yeah, I get it. I get his metaphysical value judgment. It's right there. No translation needed. But that's, generally who is considered a good art. Like if you go back to over the last 200 years, anybody who portrays heroes, anything positive, anything pleasant, anything nice, oh, that's just kitsch. That's not interesting. That's just garbage. But if you're suffering, if you're torn, if you're screaming, if you're tormented, oh, that's good. We like that. But that says something about the culture in which we live. It says something about who we are, as a culture. And it goes back to gargoyles, right? It says something about the philosophy that guides us and shapes us.
I wonder about the thoughts on socialist sculptors. Also in this regard, but like overall, you have these workers who look happy and they are feeling something in the real world.
Yeah. I mean, you got to give them credit that there's certainly, recreation of reality. There's a realism there, and you get a certain value orientation from them. I think mostly they are, they're very materialistic. They are about, the action in and of itself. They tend not to be very good, I'd say, from anatomy, because they're trying to abstract away any individualism in it. So the faces are flat, tend to be flat, uninteresting, with an expression that's very shallow and very, one-dimensional, if you will. And they, the bodies are abstracted, but again, in a way to reduce any suspicion of individuality or individualism. It's like the worker, this abstraction of the worker. And I find them cold, and I can't like, and they're very similar, by the way, to Nazi sculpture. The Nazis did the same thing, because they're supposed to inspire the worker to be a worker. In that sense, they serve the same function. But because they reject kind of man as having a soul, and having consciousness, they come across as bland and cold and in a sense not deep. So not particularly. I don't think that interesting. They do action. They're very action oriented, again, which is consistent with Marxism, an action oriented philosophy. Don't think, act. And that's the sense you get from these sculptures. Not thinkers, they're actors. One more question. Time for one question. Anybody want to have a go at the last one? Yeah.
What do you think about the music as art?
What I think of music as art. Music is the hardest art to analyze and to think about, because you see, every other art recreates a reality that is relatively easy for us to perceive, and it's easy for us to analyze it in terms of values. And at the end of the day, art is not about the analyzing, it's about the emotion. So we get an emotion from the art, but every other art has this intermediary step of first going through some process of realizing what the values are, even if it's very fast and very immediate. Music tends to go directly to your emotions. And indeed, what it's recreating in reality is probably emotional states. It's recreating the thing by which you're responding to it, which makes it a lot more difficult and immediate. It doesn't go through a conceptual phase, and it might be recreating patterns of thought and patterns of emotions. And I don't have much more to say about that, except that music goes through the same path as everything else. There's very little worthwhile music before, I don't know, 1600, 1700. And then there's this flourishing of amazing music from, I don't know, 1750 to 1900 or 1940 or something like that. And then when it comes to what you consider serious music, it's a desert for the most part. And then what survives is what's always existed, which is what you'd call popular music. And that's always been. Popular music has always been there. It's varied over the centuries, but there was popular music back to the caves. People were strumming on an instrument and doing something. But we've lost the capacity to create and even the capacity to enjoy the kind of the more complex, deeper, more emotionally satisfying music of, let's say, the 19th century. So we just have mostly superficial pop and rock and whatever you want to call it today, which is nice. I like it. Even country. I'm kidding. But it's superficial. It's shallow, and it's like candy. Whereas we've given up on the real foie gras and meat and potatoes and a good steak, and we just eat candy. That's why songs have to be 3 minutes, because you couldn't tolerate it for 6. Same beat, the same stupid melody. It's not interesting. Whereas you can sit for an hour and listen to Beethoven, and I mean, if you know how to listen, you're never bored because it's interesting.
People listen to techno as a sandwich for hours.
Yeah, they usually need drugs in order to do it. Yeah, it usually goes together, right? Because without the drugs, it doesn't quite work. You need to numb yourself to be able to listen to techno for hours. Some people can numb themselves without drugs. Other people need the drugs in order to numb themselves. I probably would need the drugs. But no, I don't get techno. It's the bizarrest, weirdest. I hear even a little bit of it, and I'm like, it drives me crazy. It's boring. All right, thank you.